There are moments in life when everything seems to close in around you. You look at your situation and see no way out. Every door feels locked. Every prayer feels unanswered, and every day feels heavier than the one before. You whisper to yourself, "I've tried everything," and maybe you have. But sometimes it's when everything seems impossible that heaven begins to move. Because faith doesn't start when things are easy. Faith begins when your strength ends. When your logic says, "There's no way," and your heart dares to say, "But maybe God still can." That's where the story changes. Jesus once looked into the eyes of men who couldn't understand what he was saying. He told them something that still echoes through eternity. What's impossible for men is possible for God. He wasn't talking about blind optimism. He was talking about trust, the kind of trust that holds on when everything falls apart. You see, we live in a world that tells us to believe only what we can measure. If it can't be seen, touched, or calculated, it must not be real. But faith looks deeper. Faith looks through the fog and says, "Even if I don't see it, I believe God is working." Because real faith isn't the denial of reality. It's the confidence that God's reality is greater than mine. There was a moment when a young woman in Nazareth heard something that made no sense. An angel told her that she would bear a son, though she had never known a man. Logic screamed, "Impossible." But heaven whispered, "With God, nothing is impossible." And she believed, not because she understood, but because she trusted the one who had spoken. That's what faith does. It doesn't erase fear, it overrules it. It doesn't demand understanding, it chooses surrender. Faith stands at the edge of impossibility and says, "Lord, even here, I will trust you." Maybe you're standing at that edge right now. Maybe the report wasn't what you hoped for. Maybe the door you prayed would open has stayed shut. Maybe you've been carrying a weight for so long that you don't even remember what rest feels like. And you're wondering, where is God in all this? He's closer than your next breath. He hasn't forgotten. He hasn't changed his mind about you. He's not testing your strength. He's deepening your trust. Because sometimes the miracle isn't that the mountain moves, but that your heart learns to rest while it's still standing there. The scripture reminds us that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not yet seen. That means faith isn't about seeing first. It's about believing first. It's like planting a seed in the soil. You don't see roots forming, but something is happening underground. The darkness of the soil isn't proof that nothing is happening. It's the very condition that allows growth, and maybe that's where you are, buried in uncertainty, surrounded by silence. But in God's timing, the seed breaks open and life begins. That's what faith looks like. Not control, but surrender. Not certainty, but trust. It's what Jesus meant when he said that even faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains. He wasn't exaggerating. He was describing the way heaven responds to even the smallest act of belief. When you take one step in trust, heaven takes 1,000 toward you. When you whisper, "God, I believe you," in the middle of your confusion, something shifts. Because faith attracts the presence of God. It invites him into the impossible, and sometimes that's all he's waiting for. Not for you to fix it, not for you to understand it, but simply for you to trust him. To say, "Lord, I can't, but you can." That's where peace begins to rise. Not because everything suddenly makes sense, but because your soul remembers who's in control. And maybe that's what God is asking of you tonight. Not to figure it out, but to lean in, to let go of the how and rest in the who, to remember that the God who created the stars hasn't lost sight of you. When everything seems impossible, faith doesn't deny the mountain. It looks beyond it. It sees the hand of God steady and sure, even when everything else is shaking. And do you know what happens when you begin to trust Him like that? He starts to write a story in your life that no human hand could have written, a story where impossibility becomes testimony, and waiting becomes worship. There's a quiet place where faith begins to breathe again, right in the middle of your exhaustion. That moment when you whisper, "God, I can't carry this anymore," and somehow a stillness enters the room. It's not the absence of the storm, it's the presence of the one who calms it. Faith is not loud. It doesn't always shout or shake the heavens. Sometimes it's as soft as a trembling yes, a whispered, "I trust you," when everything inside you wants to give up. That's where the deepest miracles are born. In surrender, not in striving. Do you remember when Abraham looked up at the night sky? He saw nothing but darkness, yet God told him to count the stars. It was a promise wrapped in impossibility. He didn't see the evidence, but he chose to believe the voice that had spoken. And that belief became the seed of a nation. Faith always begins in darkness before it blooms in light. Maybe your night has lasted too long. Maybe you've prayed until your words ran out. But faith isn't measured by how much you say. It's measured by how much you trust when there's nothing left to say. God doesn't ask you to be strong. He asks you to be still, to let Him be the strength that carries what you cannot. There's a sacred truth that echoes through Scripture. When God wants to show His power, He often allows circumstances to look impossible, not because He delights in your struggle, but because He wants your heart to know. This could only have been God. That's why the Red Sea didn't open before Moses arrived. It opened when he lifted his hand in faith, standing between fear and obedience. God waited for the moment when surrender would meet His power. Maybe your Red Sea isn't made of water. Maybe it's made of bills you can't pay, people you can't change, or a future you can't predict. But the principle is the same. Stand still, and you'll see what only God can do. Because when everything seems impossible, God is often closer than ever. He is the unseen hand working behind every closed door. Faith doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. It means choosing to believe that even the breaking can become blessing. It's like clay in the potter's hands. Pressure doesn't destroy it. It shapes it. And maybe, just maybe, God is shaping you through what feels unbearable right now. You've been asking, "Why, Lord?" And maybe His answer isn't a reason. It's a revelation. Because I'm making something eternal out of what feels temporary. He's turning your pain into purpose, your waiting into worship, your fear into foundation. Sometimes faith is just showing up one more time, one more prayer, one more act of kindness, one more day of saying, "God, I still believe you." Because every time you choose faith over fear, heaven takes notice. God sees it, and He rewards it, not always with what you expected, but always with Himself. Remember what Jesus said about that mustard seed? It's the smallest of seeds, but when it grows, it becomes a tree where birds find rest. That's how faith works. It starts small, hidden, unseen, but when it's watered with trust, it becomes a refuge for others. Your faith isn't just about your miracle. It's about the people who will find hope through your story. You might not see it now, but one day someone will look at your life and say, "If God carried them through that, He can carry me too." That's the beauty of faith. It multiplies hope. It takes your tears and turns them into testimony. So tonight, If all you can do is lift your heart and whisper, "God, I believe you still can," that's enough. He hears even the quietest cries. He remembers the promises he made, and he is faithful to finish what he started. There's no limit to what he can do. No mountain too high, no valley too deep, no heart too broken. He specializes in impossible places, because impossible is the stage where his glory shines the brightest. And do you know what begins to happen when you live like that? Peace replaces panic. Worship replaces worry. You stop asking, "How will this end?" and start saying, "God, I know you're in it." That's the turning point. When your heart moves from fear to faith, and maybe that's where He's leading you now, to the quiet trust that says, "Even if I don't understand, I'm still yours," to the unshakable peace that whispers, "God is here." Because when everything seems impossible, it's often the moment right before grace breaks through. And when grace comes, it changes everything. And do you know what happens when you begin to rest in that truth? Your soul starts to breathe again. And that's where we'll continue next. When the heart learns not just to believe in God, but to walk with Him through the impossible. There's a moment in every believer's life when faith stops being an idea and becomes a lifeline. When it's no longer something you talk about, it's something you cling to. That moment when everything you planned collapses and all that's left is God. And maybe that's right where you are now. You've done what you could. You've prayed. You've worked. You've waited. But the miracle hasn't come, at least not yet. And the silence feels heavy. The question rises, "God, where are you in all of this?" He's there. Not in the absence of struggle, but right in the middle of it. You may not see His hand, but you can trust His heart. He is the same God who spoke to the storm and calmed the waves. The same God who lifted Peter when he started to sink. And He hasn't changed. Faith isn't about pretending the storm isn't real. It's about knowing that Jesus is in your boat. It's realizing that the one who commands the sea is not watching from the shore. He's standing beside you in the waves. And maybe that's what you need to remember tonight. Faith doesn't always remove the storm. Sometimes it gives you peace within it. Because peace is not the absence of trouble. It's the presence of Christ. Think about the Israelites when they stood before the Red Sea. Behind them, an army. Before them, an ocean. And in that impossible space, God said, "Move forward." He didn't part the waters first. He asked for faith first. Because sometimes obedience precedes the miracle. That's the way faith grows, one step at a time, often into what doesn't make sense. And it's in those steps of obedience that you discover something. God's faithfulness was never dependent on your understanding. Maybe that's why He allows mountains that seem immovable. Not to crush you, but to teach you that your words of faith carry power when your heart is anchored in Him. Jesus said that if your faith is even as small as a mustard seed, you can speak to the mountain and it will move. He wasn't just teaching about miracles, He was teaching about trust. That even the smallest measure of genuine faith, rooted in God, has the strength to shift what human hands cannot. You see, faith is never wasted. Every tear you've cried, every moment you've waited, every time you've whispered, "Lord, I still believe," it's all being gathered by the one who sees in secret. Nothing is lost with Him, and while you're waiting, He's working. While you're praying, He's preparing. While you're standing still, He's setting the stage for something greater than you can imagine. Sometimes, the waiting room is the workshop of miracles. Because in waiting, faith is purified. You learn to love God not for what He does, but for who He is. You learn that trust is not built on answered prayers, but on the certainty that God never fails His children. And when you start to live like that, not desperate, but surrendered, peace begins to grow where fear once lived. You start to realize that the same God who wrote the beginning of your story is already standing at its end. He knows what you cannot see. And what looks like delay is often divine design. Think about Joseph in that dark prison cell. Forgotten by men, but not by God. Years later, what once looked like betrayal became the very road to destiny. Because when everything seems impossible, God is often setting the foundation for the miracle to come. So, don't despise the delay. Don't let the silence convince you that He's not speaking. Sometimes the teacher stays quiet during the test, but his silence is not his absence. It's his preparation. Faith is not about escaping the valley. It's about finding God there. And when you do, the valley becomes holy ground, the place where impossibility meets divine presence. Maybe you're still standing in front of that mountain. Maybe you've said, "Lord, I've spoken faith, I've prayed, but nothing's moved." And maybe God's whisper back to you is, it's not the mountain that needs to move first, it's your heart. Because once your heart rests in Him, even if the mountain stays, you'll find that peace was the real miracle all along. And that's where transformation begins. When faith becomes more than hope for change, it becomes confidence in the unchanging one. So tonight, let this truth settle deep inside you. The impossible isn't your enemy, it's your invitation. An invitation to trust, to surrender, to see God prove Himself faithful once again. And do you know what happens when you start to live like that? Your prayers stop being desperate cries for rescue and become peaceful conversations of trust. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start saying, "Use me." Because faith doesn't just change circumstances, it changes hearts. And when your heart begins to change, you start to see life differently. You begin to walk not by sight, but by faith, steady, quiet, certain. And that's where we'll continue next. When faith not only survives impossibility, but learns to rejoice in it. There comes a time when faith must grow roots, not shallow ones that survive only in the sun, but deep ones that hold firm when the wind howls. Faith that isn't shaken by what you see, because it's anchored in who God is. That's the kind of faith that shines brightest in impossible seasons. When everything seems impossible, the natural reaction is to fight, to fix, to figure things out. You want to control what you can, hoping that somehow your effort will make the pain go away. But there's a sacred moment when God calls you to stop fighting and start trusting, to lay down your weapons and let Him fight for you. That's what happened with Jehoshaphat. An army far greater than his surrounded Judah. He could have panicked, but instead he prayed. And God's answer wasn't a battle plan. It was a promise. The battle is not yours, but mine. So Jehoshaphat did something illogical. He sent singers to the front lines. While others drew swords, he lifted worship. And in that worship, the impossible shifted. The enemies destroyed themselves, and Judah saw victory without lifting a hand. That's what happens when you choose faith over fear. Your worship becomes your weapon. Your trust becomes your strength, because faith doesn't always change what you face, but it always changes how you face it. Maybe that's what God is asking of you today, to stop trying to win battles that were never yours to fight, to release the burden you've been carrying, the one that's been keeping you up at night. He's saying, "Be still and watch what I can do," because when you stop striving, you make room for His power to move. Faith isn't a feeling. It's not a rush of emotion on Sunday morning, or a burst of inspiration when things go right. Faith is a choice. A steady, quiet yes when everything around you says no. It's waking up and saying, "Lord, I still trust you," even when nothing looks different. Think about the disciples rowing against the storm all night. They were exhausted, soaked, and terrified. And when they finally saw Jesus walking on the water, they didn't recognize him at first. Fear distorted their vision. That's what fear does. It makes even the presence of God look like a threat. But Jesus said, "Take courage, it's me. Don't be afraid." And that moment changed everything. Because faith always begins with recognizing who's in front of you. If you could see what God sees, how close you are, how carefully He's been guiding your steps, you'd stop worrying. You'd realize that His silence wasn't absence, it was alignment. He was aligning the right people, the right timing, the right doors. He was shaping your heart so that when the miracle arrives, your faith won't crumble under its weight. Sometimes, the hardest faith is not in doing, but in waiting. Waiting when everyone else is moving ahead. Waiting when the world tells you to give up. Waiting when it feels like heaven has gone quiet. But in those seasons, God is doing His deepest work. He's not just changing your situation, He's changing you. Because the goal of faith isn't just breakthrough, it's transformation. God doesn't just want to give you a miracle. He wants to make you unshakable. He wants to teach you to walk by trust, not by sight. To rest in His character, not in outcomes. Faith is like a candle in the night. It doesn't remove the darkness, but it proves that the darkness hasn't won. And when you hold on to that light, even trembling, it becomes a testimony to others who've lost their way. Your endurance becomes their encouragement. Your story becomes their hope. There's a beauty in the way God redeems what once looked impossible. One day, you'll look back and realize that what once felt like breaking was actually building. That what once felt like loss was God making room for something eternal. And you'll understand that His no was never rejection. It was redirection. So, if you're walking through a valley that makes no sense, lift your eyes. Because faith doesn't deny the valley. It declares that even here, God is faithful. And when you start to see your life through that lens, impossibility loses its power. It becomes the backdrop for grace, the canvas for miracles. Maybe today your prayer doesn't need to be, "God, change this." Maybe it needs to be, "God, change me in this." Because when your heart shifts, everything else begins to fall into place. And do you know what happens when you start to trust like that? Your fear fades. Your steps steady. And even before the breakthrough comes, you start to feel free. That's the freedom of faith. Peace before the promise. Joy before the answer. Because faith doesn't wait to rejoice until after the mountain moves. It starts singing while it's still standing there. And maybe that's what God is inviting you into right now. To worship while you wait. To praise in the middle of what you don't yet understand. Because the greatest act of faith isn't always in asking. Sometimes it's in resting. Remember Elijah, alone on the mountain, exhausted and ready to give up. He expected God to speak in fire or thunder, but the voice came in a whisper. That's faith. Learning to hear the whisper when you were expecting the storm. Because sometimes God's greatest power is revealed in His gentleness. Maybe that's what He's doing in your life right now. Not moving mountains the way you expected, but moving you. Drawing your heart closer, deeper, quieter. He's teaching you to walk not by what you see, but by who you know Him to be. Because when you know His character, You can rest even when His plan is unclear. You might not see the miracle yet, but if you could see what heaven sees, you'd know. It's already in motion. Faith doesn't demand to see the whole path. It just keeps walking. It's the step forward when logic says, stop. It's the prayer whispered through tears. It's the hand lifted in praise while you're still waiting for the answer. And one day, you'll look back and realize that the very season that felt impossible was the place where God proved His faithfulness the most. You'll see that the pain had purpose, that the silence was sacred, that the waiting built the roots your soul needed. And you'll understand that faith was never wasted. Every tear was a seed, and every seed brought forth something eternal. So say it quietly with me. God, I trust you, even here, even now. Let that be your prayer tonight, because that simple confession has the power to unlock peace, to restore hope, to reignite your heart. And as you rest in that truth, remember this. What looks impossible to man is possible with God. Always has been. Always will be. Now, hold that truth close. Let it breathe life into your faith again. So keep believing, keep trusting, keep walking. And if this reflection spoke to your heart today, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and as you go, remember, your story is still being written by the author who never fails. Because when everything seems impossible, that's when God is just getting started. When the heart finally understands that the same God who began the story will finish it perfectly in His time.